I stood at the curb of the airport, clutching the handle of my suitcase with both hands. The cold metal dug into my palms, but I didn't loosen my grip. I watched my son's car as it rolled away, slowly at first, then faster, then gone. He hadn't even let me get in. He didn't even open the door. "Mom, you're too old to travel with us now. It's too much," he'd said. Just like that. No discussion. No warning. He didn't even get out of the car. My coat was zipped up to my chin, my hair done, my bag packed 3 days early. I had even printed the boarding passes and tucked them into the side pocket. I stood there like a fool, like someone waiting to be picked, but I'd already been dismissed. My daughter-in-law didn't say a word. She sat in the passenger seat, scrolling on her phone. The kids looked up from the back, wide-eyed, confused. They didn't understand. How could they? A week ago, I was helping them with a school project. And now I was too old. I stood on the porch after they left. I didn't go back inside right away. I stared down at my shoes, the good ones, the ones I wore for special occasions. My legs were shaking. From the cold or the embarrassment, I still don't know. It felt like the ground had shifted, and all I could do was stand there and let it. I didn't cry, not then. I just went inside. I put the suitcase by the door and took off my coat in silence. The house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock in the hallway. I walked into the kitchen and sat at the table. The wood was cold under my arms. The cruise ticket was still in the drawer by the fridge. I had meant it as a surprise. A gift to say thank you for letting me be a part of their lives. I imagined their faces when I told them. I imagined the kids excitedly running to pack. But I never got the chance. They didn't even know. I didn't take the ticket out. I just sat there, staring at the drawer, remembering the moment I bought it. I had even called the cruise line to ask about kids' activities. I made sure there were options for gluten-free meals, because my daughter-in-law once mentioned she was trying to eat cleaner. I thought of everything. Except this. Over the past year, things had changed. Slowly, quietly. First it was the dinners I wasn't invited to anymore. Then it was the birthdays I was told about after the fact. The photos they stopped sending. The school events they stopped mentioning. It was all so gradual I almost missed it. I told myself they were busy. Everyone's busy. That's what I said when they canceled Sunday lunch 3 weeks in a row. That's what I told myself when my calls started going to voicemail. But now, standing in the doorway with my suitcase still packed, I saw it all for what it was. I had become a burden. I didn't yell. I didn't text him back. I didn't beg for an explanation. I just moved around the house like someone living in a memory. I put the kettle on and forgot about it. I opened a book and didn't turn the page. I stared out the window until the sky turned pink and then gray. I remembered the time he broke his arm falling off the swing. He was 7. I carried him to the car myself, barefoot, because I didn't want to waste a second. I remembered the nights I stayed up sewing his Halloween costumes by hand. The year he wanted to be a dragon and I learned how to stitch scales. The time I drove 3 hours in a snowstorm to bring him soup when he caught the flu in college. None of that mattered now. It felt like someone had erased me while I wasn't looking, like I was being written out of a story I helped build. The next morning, I made toast and stared at the empty chair across from me. It used to be filled with noise, with requests, with little voices calling, "Grandma, look!" But now it was just air. The kind that doesn't move unless you open a window. I didn't know what I'd do next. I didn't feel brave. I felt broken, like a piece of furniture moved out of the way. But somewhere, deep beneath the ache, something stirred. Not anger. Not yet. Just a quiet question. What if I still matter, even if they don't see it? I didn't answer that question. Not then. I just let it sit with me, the way you let a cup of tea cool beside you when you don't have the appetite to drink it. Later that afternoon, I opened the drawer. The cruise ticket was still there. I ran my fingers along the paper. I had spent weeks planning that trip. I had studied the map, circled the ports. I had imagined standing on the deck with the grandkids, showing them the stars. I sat back in my chair. The house was still quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you've disappeared. But I was still here. I was still breathing, still thinking, still hurting, yes, but still here. And maybe that was enough to start again. I didn't call anyone. I didn't make a list. I didn't explain myself. I just walked to the hallway, picked up my suitcase, and unzipped it. The clothes were still folded. I took them out one by one, smoothing each shirt, each pair of socks. I placed them in the drawers slowly, like I was undoing something, not out of defeat, but out of clarity. Then I paused. Maybe I didn't have to unpack. Maybe I wasn't too old. Maybe I didn't need anyone's permission to go. And in that still, lonely room, I made a decision. I would take the cruise. Alone. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I didn't text, I didn't call, and I didn't ask for a ride. I booked a cab to the airport early in the morning and stood outside my house with my small suitcase and the same scarf I used to wear on trips with my husband. The air was still. The birds weren't even awake yet. It felt like the whole world was still deciding whether I deserved a goodbye. When the cab pulled up, the driver didn't ask many questions. He helped with the bag and nodded when I told him the terminal. I watched the streets pass by like they belonged to someone else. My hands trembled a little, but I didn't let it show. I kept them folded in my lap. At the airport, I moved through the line slowly. I double-checked everything: boarding pass, passport, ID. No one was there to rush me. No one waited for me at the gate. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to worry about keeping anyone else on schedule. It should have felt freeing. But honestly, it felt like floating. I walked onto the plane alone. I sat by the window and stared out as the world shrank beneath the clouds. I tried not to think about the empty chair beside me. I tried not to imagine my grandkids giggling in the row across, or my daughter-in-law adjusting her neck pillow. I closed my eyes and counted slowly, not to sleep, but just to anchor myself. When I arrived at the port and stepped onto the cruise ship, I was greeted with music and laughter. Staff members waved, and couples held hands as they took pictures in front of the banner. "Family Cruise Special," it said. I moved past it quietly. The first few hours felt like walking through someone else's dream. Children running toward the pool deck. Parents yelling playfully. Grandparents surrounded by family, helping with sunscreen, passing out juice boxes. I found a chair near the railing and just sat. The ocean stretched out in all directions, blue, massive, indifferent. It reminded me of how small I really was. Not in a sad way. Just honest. Later that day, I checked into my cabin. It was neat and small. One bed. One chair. A small balcony. I placed my suitcase on the bed and unpacked slowly, folding everything like it mattered. I hung the scarf over the chair and looked out through the sliding glass door. I ate dinner alone that night. When I walked into the dining hall, the hostess smiled politely and asked, "Are you waiting for your family?" I paused, just a second too long. Then I said, "No, just me." That was the first honest thing I'd said in years. She smiled again, softer this time, and led me to a table by the window. I sat with my back straight, napkin in my lap, hands still. I watched the sun set into the water, the colors folding over each other like a painting no one was allowed to touch. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I wasn't hurt in the same sharp way I had been when they drove away without me. I was just tired. Tired of performing love. Tired of hoping someone would look back. On the second night, I wandered into the piano bar. The lights were dim, and the music was low, the kind that gently covers your thoughts instead of drowning them. I sat at the corner of the bar, ordered tea, and let the warm cup steady my hands. An older man sat a few seats away. He wore a navy blazer and had a kind smile. At some point, he looked over and said, "That's a beautiful scarf." I smiled back. "Thank you. My husband bought it for me years ago." He nodded. He had good taste. We didn't say much else that night, just a few words. But it was the first real conversation I'd had in weeks. One that didn't come with obligations or undercurrents or the unspoken weight of needing to be useful to someone else. The next morning, I woke up early and walked the upper deck as the ship moved through the open sea. The wind was cool. I wrapped my coat around me and leaned on the railing. I thought about my son. I thought about all the times I said yes when I wanted to say no. The nights I babysat on short notice. The money I quietly transferred when they were struggling. The way I always smiled when they walked into the room, even if I'd been crying before they arrived. I had given so much of myself away. I had done it willingly, but now I wasn't sure who I had become without them. What was left when no one needed me anymore? I watched a mother help her daughter tie her shoelace on a lounge chair. I watched a couple laugh as they tried to take a selfie with the wind blowing in their faces. I didn't envy them. I just observed. Like I was studying a language I once spoke but had forgotten. Later that evening, I ran into the same man from the piano bar. He was sitting on a bench near the shuffleboard court, reading. He looked up and nodded. "Evening," he said. "Evening." We sat for a while, not talking. Eventually, he said, "You look like someone who used to dance." I laughed. Really laughed. Not the polite kind. I did. A long time ago. Thought so. It was small, but it mattered. Someone saw me. Not as a mother or a grandmother or someone to be pitied. Just me. That night, I sat on my balcony and listened to the ocean. I thought about all the versions of myself I had let go of over the years. The one who used to love music. The one who stayed up reading novels. The one who used to paint little watercolor cards for fun. I hadn't killed those parts of me. I had just packed them away, convinced there wasn't space for them anymore. But maybe I could open the drawer again. I don't know when it happened exactly, but something inside me began to thaw. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. Just slowly, softly, like a frozen river remembering how to move. By the end of the cruise, I wasn't a new woman. I didn't come back with a tan or a lover or some grand epiphany. But I did come back with something else, a quiet belief that I didn't need to wait for someone to choose me. I could choose myself. And that was enough to keep going. I got back just after noon. The cab dropped me off at the curb, and I stood there for a moment before pulling my suitcase up the steps. The front door was just as I'd left it. Locked, silent, waiting. I half expected something different. Not balloons or hugs or banners, but maybe a note. Maybe a plate of cookies from the kids. A scribbled drawing that said, "Welcome home, Grandma." There was nothing. Not even a footprint on the porch. I let myself in and stood in the front hallway for a few seconds. The light from the living room window stretched across the floor, and the air smelled like unopened rooms. I hadn't been gone long, but it felt like I was stepping into a stranger's house. I rolled my suitcase to the bedroom, changed into something soft, and walked into the kitchen. The floor creaked like it always did. The humming fridge was the same. Even the dish I forgot to wash before I left was still in the sink, like time had waited for me. I sat at the kitchen table. The wood felt colder than usual. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No texts. Just one voice message. It was from my son. 40 seconds long. I listened to it twice before I even processed the words. "Mom, I heard you went on the cruise anyway. I don't even know what to say. You made it about you. Again. We said we needed space. We were clear. And instead of respecting that, you went and did what you always do, made a big show. You embarrassed us, Mom. His voice wasn't raised. It wasn't angry. It was cold. Flat. Like I was a disappointing coworker. Like I had violated a rule in a contract I never agreed to. I played it again. And again. I didn't cry. I didn't clench my fists or throw the phone. I just sat there, the message looping in my head. You made it about you. Again. As if all the years I made it about them didn't count anymore. I thought back to the cruise, the quiet mornings, the ocean stretching past everything, the kindness of strangers. It hadn't been about them. It hadn't even been about proving a point. It was about remembering that I still existed outside their needs. I looked around the kitchen. The photos on the wall, birthdays, Halloween costumes, first days of school. Crayon drawings still stuck to the fridge with magnets shaped like fruits. I had kept everything. There was a rock on the windowsill with "I love Grandma" written in faded marker. My grandson gave it to me 2 years ago. I remember the moment like it was stitched to my skin. He was 5. He said, "So you can remember even when I'm not here." I touched the rock. I didn't move it. But I didn't smile either. That message from my son, it wasn't just a bad day or a poor choice of words. It was a window. A view into what I had refused to see. This wasn't a one-time exclusion. This was who they were now. And maybe who they had been becoming for a long time. I opened a drawer and pulled out a small notebook. It had a floral cover. I used to write recipes in it, before I got used to cooking the same 5 meals. I sat at the table and flipped past the first few pages. Then I started writing. Not a letter. Not a speech. Just things I remembered. I wrote about the time my son lost his job and I dipped into my retirement savings to cover their rent. I never told anyone. I just transferred the money and said, "Take care of your family." I wrote about the times they dropped the kids off last minute. No warning, no thanks, and I canceled everything without complaint. I'd keep snacks in the cupboard just in case. I'd pretend I was thrilled, every time, even when I was exhausted. I wrote about the time I sold my car. They needed a down payment for theirs, and mine was paid off. I told myself I didn't drive much anyway. I wasn't tallying. I wasn't preparing for a confrontation. I was just remembering. Because suddenly, I realized how much I had forgotten. Not because I didn't care, but because I had made forgetting a habit. Forgetting my own limits. My own wants. My own exhaustion. For years, I said yes when I wanted to say maybe. I gave when I had nothing left. I stayed silent so they wouldn't feel guilty. I turned the page and wrote a date, October 15th, the day my husband died. The day everything changed. I had taken care of everyone after that. I made the funeral arrangements. I paid the bills. I showed up for Thanksgiving even though my eyes still burned from crying the night before. I wrote down how my son said, "You're so strong, Mom." And I believed him. I wore that strength like armor, thinking it would keep me from ever being left behind. But strength, I've learned, can be mistaken for availability. If you always say, "I'm fine," people believe you. Until one day, you're not. And they don't notice. I closed the notebook and sat back. The sun had shifted across the table, warming the edge of the wood. I let my hand rest in that sliver of light. I didn't feel revenge. I didn't feel fury. I felt something smaller, sharper. Preservation. Not the kind that builds walls, but the kind that starts drawing lines. I made a cup of tea and stood by the window. The backyard hadn't changed. The swing was still there, the one my husband hung for the kids. The grass needed mowing. I thought about what I would say if my son called. If he knocked on the door. If he asked me why I hadn't responded. But I knew he wouldn't. That message, that voice note, it wasn't an opening. It was a door shutting softly. And I had to decide if I would keep standing in front of it, waiting, or if I would finally walk away. The tea was too hot to drink. I held the mug anyway. I thought of all the times I had told myself, they mean well. They're just busy. They don't realize. But they did. Somewhere inside them they knew. They knew I would stay quiet. That I would absorb it. I set the tea down, walked to the living room, looked at every photo, every frame, the smiles, the celebrations, the years of trying to belong. I didn't take anything down, but I saw it all differently now. Not with grief, but with clarity. And for the first time in a long time, I started thinking not about how to be more included, but about how to be more whole. Without them. I met her on a Thursday afternoon at the library. The kind of day where the sky was pale and indecisive, and the air carried the faint smell of old leaves and something baking in the distance. I had been going to the library off and on, trying to find things that kept me company without asking anything in return. The book club met every other week in a quiet back room with stale coffee and too many folding chairs. I didn't go to speak. Not at first. I just liked hearing other people talk about stories. It reminded me that not all lives were lived quietly and then forgotten. Marta was new. New to the club. New to the neighborhood. She had silver hair that curled at the ends and a scarf with little embroidered birds around her neck. She smiled at everyone and somehow made it feel like she was smiling just at you. She brought lemon bars to share. When I reached for one, she said, "Be honest, they're a little too sweet." I laughed. Really laughed. "They're perfect." She sat next to me and told me she'd just moved into the house on Birch Street. Said she was still learning where the good tomatoes were and which corner had the softest light in the morning. We talked about books, then about recipes, then about the way soup tastes better after it sits overnight. The next week, she brought me a small container of homemade stew. "It's better than the lemon bars," she said. "Trust me." She was right. It was rich and warm and had a kind of comfort I didn't know I missed until I had it again. She invited me to her place the following week. Nothing formal. Just lunch. I brought her a loaf of the bread I still knew how to bake, though I rarely did anymore. Her kitchen was filled with little signs of someone who had loved and lost and decided to keep living anyway. Pictures, plants, soft towels. She had music playing, old songs that hummed low and kind. We talked for hours. Not about the weather or surface things, but about what it felt like to become invisible in your own family. To love so much you forgot where you ended and they began. She told me about her daughter, how she passed in her early 30s. She liked red shoes, she said, staring into her tea. Bright ones. I still talk to her when I cook. I nodded. I talk to my husband when I forget where I put things. Marta looked at me, and something passed between us, that quiet, heavy understanding only women our age seem to carry. The ache of being needed for so long and then suddenly, not. Over the next month, we met often. At the library. At each other's homes. Once at a park, where we sat on a bench and watched children chase each other through fallen leaves. She said, "They never really see us, do they? Not unless we're holding something they need." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. It wasn't just her words. It was the way she looked at me when I spoke. Like what I said had weight. Like I wasn't a relic of someone else's past, but a person still living a present of her own. I found myself telling her things I hadn't said out loud in years. About the cruise. The voice note. The blue sweater. About how I used to lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, wondering if love could turn cold without anyone meaning to. Marta didn't interrupt. She didn't offer solutions. She just listened. And then she said, "That must have hurt." And I broke. Not into pieces. Just enough to let some light in. I started cooking again. Small meals. Nothing fancy. But I set the table for myself. Cloth napkin. Real plate. A glass of water with lemon. I started walking in the mornings. Just around the block. Not for exercise. For air. And when I came back, I'd find a note from Marta in the mailbox or a jar of something on my porch. She made a plum jam that tasted like late summers. We didn't fix each other. That's not what this was. But she held up a mirror. One that showed me not as a tired mother or an abandoned grandmother, but as a woman who still had things to say, to make, to laugh about. She gave me space to be real. One afternoon, we sat on her porch drinking tea, and I said, "I think I spent my whole life trying to be indispensable." She nodded. "And now?" I sipped. Let the warmth sit on my tongue. "Now I think I'd rather be at peace." Marta smiled and reached over to squeeze my hand. "That's harder," she said. "But it lasts longer." I didn't respond. Just watched the light fall across her porch steps. It reminded me of childhood. Of quiet days when everything didn't have to be earned or explained. That night, I pulled out my notebook again. I wrote about Marta. Her scarf. Her laugh. The way she said, "Soup is just therapy in a bowl." I wrote that it wasn't revenge I wanted. It was release. And for the first time, I considered that maybe boundaries weren't walls. Maybe they were doors. Ones I could choose to close gently. Not to punish, but to protect. I sat across from the banker in his glass office, the pen still warm from the paper I'd just signed. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels padded, like sound has been softened so decisions don't echo too loudly. He was polite, professional. His tie had little golden birds on it. I noticed that detail, not because it mattered, but because it grounded me in something real. He slid the last copy toward me. "That's everything," he said. "All formalized." I nodded and thanked him. No fanfare. No hesitation. I had changed the executor of my will. Removed my son's name. Appointed a lawyer instead. Someone objective, someone distant. I'd also allocated a portion of my estate to organizations I believed in. A shelter. A reading fund. A local hospice. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was a kind of untangling. I walked home slowly. The streets felt different. Not in the way a place physically changes, but in how you see it once you've made a decision you can't undo. Every crack in the sidewalk felt like a story. Every tree felt older. I didn't tell anyone. Not right away. But the news found its way to him. It took a few days. Then he called. Not a message. Not a note. A real call. His name lit up on my phone like it used to when he was a teenager, calling to ask if he could stay out later. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Can we talk?" I told him he could come by. He arrived the next morning, holding a paper bag of pastries like a peace offering. I didn't comment on it. We sat in the living room. He looked around, as if scanning for signs that something had changed. Maybe he expected boxes packed. A note taped to the wall. He didn't sit right away. He walked slowly around the room. Finally, he said, "I heard from the bank." I nodded. "They said, you updated everything. You removed me as executor." "Yes," I said. He sat down across from me, still holding the paper bag. He didn't open it. There was a pause. A long one. Then, "Why?" I looked at him. Really looked. His hairline had thinned a little. There were lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. He looked older. Or maybe I just hadn't let myself see it. I folded my hands in my lap. Because you no longer see me as someone worth listening to, I said. He blinked. That's not true. I smiled softly. You don't have to argue. I'm not accusing you. I'm just naming what's real. He leaned forward. Mom, come on. We've had a rough patch. That doesn't mean you left me out, I said gently. Repeatedly. Not just from vacations. From your heart. From your trust. From the place I once held as your mother. He shook his head. That's not fair. I'm not trying to be fair. I'm trying to be honest. He finally opened the bag, took out a croissant and set it on the table but didn't eat it. You're being vindictive. I let that word sit there. Let it hang in the room like steam from a cup that's been left untouched. No, I said. I'm being clear. He frowned. Is this because of the cruise? I didn't answer that directly. It's because I've realized I don't want to leave behind a version of myself I don't recognize. One who kept giving and giving, hoping it would one day be enough. He looked wounded. Maybe for real. Maybe for the image he thought he had of me. I would have come around, he said. Things just got busy. I nodded. They always do. He picked at the croissant, pulling flakes from the crust and letting them fall into the bag. You're really cutting me out? No, I said. I'm not cutting anyone out. I'm just not centering you anymore. That's a different thing. He leaned back. So what, you're punishing me? I kept my voice calm. I'm protecting myself. Another long silence. The room felt fuller somehow. Like all the unspoken things were finally visible. He stood. I guess there's nothing else to say. There is, I said. I still love you. That hasn't changed. But I won't let that love cost me myself. He nodded slowly. Okay. Then he left. I didn't cry. Not after the door closed. Not after the sound of his car faded down the street. I just sat there, looking at the untouched croissant on the table. The act of removing him as executor wasn't born from hate. It was born from a long, quiet accumulation of being unseen. Later that night, I sat in my room, the air cool from the window I had left cracked. I looked around, the lamp, the books on the nightstand, the blue sweater painting on the wall. I felt tired, not just from the conversation, from everything, but I also felt light. I wasn't doing this to make a statement. I wasn't doing this to teach him a lesson. I was doing this because I had finally accepted something hard, that being someone's mother does not mean accepting mistreatment in perpetuity. There's a difference between sacrifice and self-erasure. I chose, at last, to stop confusing the two. And in that choice, I found something like peace. I used to wait for their calls. Every buzz of my phone would send a flicker through my chest. Hope, dread, some mixture of both. I'd look at the screen like it might offer a piece of myself back. Like maybe this time, it would be my son. Or one of the grandkids. Maybe they'd need something. Or maybe they just want to hear my voice. But lately, the silence doesn't hurt the way it used to. It's there. But it doesn't feel like rejection anymore. It feels like air. I've started lighting a candle in the evenings. A small one that smells like cedarwood and mint. I make a cup of tea, sometimes chamomile, sometimes lemon balm, and I sit by the window in the room with the most light. I read. Not anything heavy. Sometimes just old cookbooks or essays from the library. Things that remind me of texture, of warmth. Sometimes I listen to music. Nothing loud. Piano, mostly. The kind that carries you without asking anything in return. I see Marta every Sunday. We take turns cooking. She brings stories, and I bring leftovers, and we laugh about things no one else would find funny. Like how the grocery store moved the milk section and ruined her whole system. Or how I dropped a jar of lentils and let them roll under the stove like marbles. We play cards sometimes. Or just sit, comfortable in the way silence becomes soft between people who understand each other. The community center was Marta's idea. They were short on help. I didn't sign up to prove anything, just to be somewhere where time moved differently. Where people still looked you in the eye when they said thank you. I help with meals. Soup, mostly. The kind that starts with bones and onions and patience. The kind that teaches you to wait, not because you're helpless, but because some things are better when they take their time. There are young mothers who come in with their little ones. Some look so tired I want to hand them a nap instead of a bowl. I show them how to stretch a roast, how to flavor rice, how to make broth taste like home, even when money is tight. One of them, a girl named Cassie, asked me if I had grandkids. I told her yes. She asked if they visited. I said, not lately. She looked at me for a long second. Then she said, well, they're missing out. I smiled. It was enough. The house feels different now. Not emptier. Just mine. The pictures are still on the walls. The drawings still hang by the kitchen calendar. I didn't take anything down. I didn't erase my past. But I also stopped building my future around a door that no longer opens. I put the house in a trust. Quietly. I made decisions that felt like me, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Some things will go to causes that matter. Some to people who have shown up. And some to no one at all, just left where they are as proof that I was here. Maybe one day they'll notice. Maybe my son will ask again. Or maybe he won't. But it won't change what I've already built for myself. A room with light. A shelf of worn books. A drawer with one blue sweater, folded with care. A painting that makes no sense to anyone but me. Sometimes I think back to the cruise. To that first dinner alone. The way I said, just me, to the hostess and meant it. How terrifying that felt. And how liberating it became. I've stopped needing an apology that may never come. I've stopped rehearsing the conversations where I finally say all the right things and he hears me, really hears me. Now, I just speak out loud to the house when I want to. Nice weather, I'll say, opening the window. Don't forget the lentils, I tell myself when I see the note on the fridge. And sometimes, when the light slants across the hallway just right, I look at the painting of the blue sweater and whisper, you were a good grandmother. Even when they stopped calling, you were still good. I don't need them to agree. I don't need witnesses. Peace doesn't require proof. It just needs space. Tonight, I'll make soup again. I've already pulled the bones from the freezer. I'll let them simmer, slow and steady, while I sip my tea. And when the room fills with that familiar scent, rich and layered, I'll smile. Not because anyone else will smell it, but because I'm here. And for the first time in a long time, that's enough.